Well, hello. Welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast, where we talk with writers from all mediums and genres about themselves, their work, and advice they have for writers. I'm your host, Paul Zeidman, and my guest today is Wendy Dale. And Wendy is the author of The Memoir Engineering System, Make Your First Draft Your Final Draft. And as a screenwriter, I can't wait to hear what she has to say about that, because screenwriting and memoirs, totally two different worlds. Wendy, welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Okay, my pleasure to have you here today, and I will read the bio off of the back of her book. Wendy Dale spent 15 years deconstructing memoirs to Wendy Dale spent 15 years deconstructing memoirs to deduce the principles that all good books rely on. She is the founder of Memoir Writing for Geniuses and the author of the memoir Avoiding Prison and Other Noble Vacation Goals. Okay, well, that's that sounds like a book worth talking about, but we'll get into that in just a minute. But as regular listeners and viewers of the show are aware, we like to start things off talking about anything we may have read or watched lately. Did we like it? Did we not like it? Are we kind of like, I don't ever need to see that again? I'll go first just to give Wendy some time to gather her thoughts. So I sat down and watched Red One, which is a Christmas movie from last year. It's on Amazon. It was okay. It's got Dwayne Johnson in it, so I think him being involved kind of adds a certain something to it. Used to be quality, but I don't know. I just think it's too much about him now. But I thought he did a good job. Chris Evans as the dad with a redemption arc, he did okay too. And J.K. Simmons as Santa, who's got arms like you wouldn't believe. That was okay. But do I need to make that an annual tradition? No. Am I glad I watched it? Yes. Do I need to see it again? No. I don't think I ever need to see it again. And there was something else I watched. Oh, there was a show I discovered on Netflix. It's called A Man on the Inside, and it is Ted Danson. Part of why I watched it because it's set in the Bay Area where I am. That he is a retired widower living in the Bay Area, and he goes undercover in a retirement community to investigate a theft. And it's about 8 episodes long, and it's a lot of stuff in San Francisco and the Bay Area, and also it's by Mike Schur, who created The Good Place. So it's a lot of like similar kind of jokes and humor. It was fun, and it's a clever mystery, and they looks like they're trying to set things up for a season two. How they'll pull that off, I do not know, but I really look forward to it, but I enjoyed it very much. And so now I will throw things over to Wendy. Wendy, has there been anything good or not so good that you've been reading or watching lately?
Okay, so this is like the other extreme. Han Kang just won the Nobel Prize. So I've been reading, I just started the novel The Vegetarian. So really the other extreme. So I've been doing that as well as watching a lot of reality television. I haven't told you this, but we're actually going to do the world's first reality show for writers. We're going to have a writing
Oh,
competition in Cusco, Peru. And so
wow.
I've been reading Nobel Prize winning authors, and on the other hand, watching a lot of reality television just to watch how it's structured. So, and getting a feel for all different kinds of shows. So, some good, some bad.
Sure.
Some I love,
So
some I
so
don't. Yeah.
was that the Nobel Prize for literature?
Yes, yes. South Korean author. Just, and I haven't finished the book. I've been enjoying it. It's interesting. I haven't gotten that far into it,
Can you
but
kind of can
yeah,
just give like a thumbnail description of like what it's about?
a vegetarian. It's
That, that,
not.
well, that
It's,
sounds Nobel Prize worthy.
well, it's called The Vegetarian, so I was
Sure,
being
sure.
sarcastic. So far, it's told from multiple points of view. There is sort of a humor to it. I like the tone a lot. The narrator's tone. There's sort of the point of view. I'm enjoying it. The writing is quite simple, but I haven't gotten that far into it. Yeah.
And I have to ask, so are there any particular reality shows that you've been watching and ones you're thinking, oh, that would be a good template to kind of work this show
Well,
off of?
so I'm analyzing what makes them work. I don't really like the reality shows that have a ton of conflict. That's
Sure.
not really my thing. So I'm kind of seeing, well, how can you have a reality show where people are nice to each other and still make it entertaining? And there are some, like the
Yeah,
Great
there's one
British
called the
Bake
British
Off.
Bake Off. Exactly. That's the only one that with nice people on it.
All nice to each other, and I don't know, I kind of like that. What is it Cake? Have you seen on Netflix?
I've heard, I haven't watched it, but I've not seen it.
It's very nice too. It's kind of nerdy and funny. And so I think I like Is It Cake is probably my favorite thus far. But
I
we
know.
won't be making any
I think
cake.
there's also I'm not sure if it's on Netflix or it's on Prime, but it's like a Harry Potter baking show. Like it's kind of like British Bake Off combined with Harry Potter. So I guess they're making themed dishes or so I haven't seen it. I just it's that's what I'm guessing it's like.
I love it.
You know, I was going to say the British Bake Off, that part of the reason that they're so nice is because they're all British. So that's all very, it's all very good manners and politeness.
No, not all the Brits are nice. Some of they made me cry. I was in London many years ago, and honestly, they yelled at me. Strangers yelled at me. So there's that proper British, but
Hmm.
there's a little bit of
I was
everything.
going to say there's
So
the one on camera and there's the one in real life. Yeah.
I'm telling them.
So that also warrants a question. So what kind of scenario would it be? A reality show for writers? Is it like writing competitions? Like, oh, come up with 3 words that describe the color red, that sort of thing, or?
Well, I've wanted to do this for a long time, and I'm a memoir writing coach, right? I love memoir, and so yeah, I come from screenwriting as well. I've been a screenwriter. I love words, and so I wanted to do this, but the reason I think there hasn't been a writing-based reality show is that it's really boring to watch
Yeah.
people write. I mean, can you imagine? Basically, you're watching people think. And so I thought, right, how interesting is that? Just ponder and write words on the page is not very interesting. And I thought, well, how could we get around that? So this has been in my head for quite a few years. And I live in the country of Peru. I live in Cusco. And I thought, well, why don't we bring 7 writers here and have them go through these cultural experiences and then write about them? So a
Hmm.
lot of what you'll see on screen is actually people interacting in Peru, having experiences in Peru. We're not going to have a lot of screen time of them actually writing, but we will have some screen time of them reading what they've written. So it is a competition.
Hmm.
It's also memoir based. So because I teach memoir writing, people have experiences and they write about their life. So that's the
Okay, I was going to
premise.
say if you want to show a show about writers trying to write, it's actually a lot of people just cleaning their house because they don't want to actually sit down and write, or they're trying to find other things to do besides actually write, or this will provide inspiration for my creative side.
I tell you, it was when I stopped cleaning my house that I became a writer, and I've not had a clean house since. It really was because it's so easy to say, I'll do the dishes, then I'll write. I finally just went, no, I just write, but my house has not been clean for 20 years, basically. So
Okay. I was going to say that's the sign of a true writer is that your house is really dirty, or maybe you're not a good writer. I don't know. It depends on the cleaning level. Wendy Dale and the book again, The Memoir Engineering System, Make Your First Draft Your Final Draft. So, Wendy, let's talk a little bit about you. Okay, you mentioned that you were a screenwriter. So, how did you get into this? I mean, did you start off writing fiction and writing and that sort of thing, and you decide I want to hear more about people's stories about themselves, and I'm going to start looking into that.
when I made the decision to become a writer in my early 20s, my goal was always to be a novelist. That was really, I loved words on the page. I grew up with books. I grew up with novels. I lived in Los Angeles, and so everyone around me was a screenwriter, but I really wanted to write novels. And I thought that writing a memoir would be an easy way into that because I thought, oh, you have to come up with plot. You've already lived it. You just write down what you've lived through. Well, that was a huge misconception. That was a long time ago. It led me on this long journey. So eventually I did get that book published, Avoiding Prison and Other Noble Vacation Goals. And in the process, I really realized that I knew very little about structuring a memoir. So that was the first time I came across memoir structure. And I managed to structure that memoir with the help of an agent, with the help of literary professionals. It took me a very long time. And the book got published. And years later, through a series of events, I found myself living in the country of Bolivia and got asked to be a memoir writing teacher because I'd written a memoir. And I thought, "Oh, okay, I can do that." And started teaching memoir and realized that I had structured one book, but I didn't really know how structure worked in memoir. And so the question came to me. All of a sudden, I'm getting these submissions from students, and supposedly I was qualified to be a teacher because I had a memoir published. But teaching and knowing how to write are two different things. And so that was when I really became fascinated with how plot works in memoir, in story in general, how all memoirs are constructed. And the way I came to the ideas I have about how all written stories are created really came because I would see the same mistakes over and over again. So I started seeing, I would get submissions and the mistakes would fall into categories. And I started realizing, well, how would I fix this mistake? And when I came to the answer of how I would fix this mistake, now I'm making this sound like it was over the course of a week, but it really was over the course of 15 years, right?
Yeah.
Of mistake after mistake and putting them into categories and saying, oh, how would I solve this? And I realized that there was actually a principle at play. So if you don't make this mistake, you're following a principle. So that's how I came up with the principles that all memoir writers need to follow in order to write a book with perfect structure. Hence the subtitle, make your first draft your final draft, because you don't have to, you're not finding your way, you're not finding your plot by writing your way toward it. The idea is that you figure out your plot, you figure out your structure, and then you write your book.
Okay, let's start with the like I guess to me what is the most basic question. What is the difference between a memoir and an autobiography? Now, to me, I'm going to give my interpretation. A memoir
Uh-huh.
is kind of like it's a select portion of the writer's life. Like, this is, my time in junior high, or this is like this was when I was a doctor with the Peace Corps. Whereas an autobiography, it's the whole thing. It's from, this is where I was born, and this is my career, and this is where I am now, or if it's, I get this is where I've retired to, that sort of thing.
Sort of.
Okay.
You're not too far off, but let me tell you what I think the main difference is. Usually an autobiography is written by someone famous. So we want to know, politician, we want to know all the stuff in theory they went through, a celebrity, Hollywood actor. An autobiography is almost always written by someone famous or ghost written by someone
Hmm.
famous or for someone famous. Memoir, I would say the biggest difference, yes, it's a more concise story, but the biggest difference is that there's actually plot. So
Hmm.
autobiography really feels a lot like a diary in the sense that I live, I was born in a log cabin in 1861 and I grew up fishing and then we moved, whatever, right? So we have then I started school in a one-room schoolhouse and then I got married to so and so and they died of leukemia.
Sure,
This is getting a
sure.
very depressing autobiography, right? So I guess I'm doing Abe Lincoln's, but I'm making this up, obviously. Log cabins, I don't know, leukemia. So um, an autobiography tends to be diary style, and it's a bunch of events that the person lived through. Whereas a memoir has plot. So when I pick up a memoir, I expect it to feel like a novel. I expect there to be a beginning, middle, and end. I expect to be pulled along. I expect there to be a single search, right? So imagine in the same way that a movie, you would never say to someone, oh, you got to go see this movie I saw the other day. It's about this guy and he was born in a log cabin and then he went to this one room schoolhouse and he married this woman. It's like, that's not how you describe a movie. You
Right.
would say, it's the right, a story, a movie has a premise, right? There's an idea driving the movie, there's a search, there's a conflict. Same thing with memoir. So you can't, it's not a little bit of everything you lived through. There's
Okay,
a
well,
search,
I was
there's
going to
plot.
say the things you were just talking about, it sounds exactly like structure because you're familiar with screenwriting. Screenplays are structure, beginning, middle,
Yep.
end, and complications ensue. So, but it's
Mhm.
not that complications are necessary for a memoir, but it's more of a chronicling of the events that this person is talking about.
So, what makes memoir particularly difficult is that you have all the information, right? So, I when I first started, I was like, oh, it'll be easy. I already have the plot of my life. I'll just write it down. Well, I didn't understand that having too much information is actually much more difficult, right? So I
Hmm.
compare fiction to oil painting. You have a blank canvas and you put down what is necessary, whether that's screenwriting or novels. With memoir, it's like sculpting. You have this big chunk of information and you sculpt away until what is left over is something resembling art. So I find it much more difficult when it comes to creating structure in memoir. It is a very different process than screenwriting or fiction because you have all of this information. What it took me 15 years to discover is that in memoir, or really in any genre, plot is connected events. So what that means, and we can talk about what that means in fiction versus memoir, it's that it's not a bunch of random stuff, right? And that is now, as a screenwriter, you don't really have that problem. You might a little bit, but not as much as a memoir writer would. Again, it's that idea that what I lived through, it feels like a story to me because I have these memories. It feels like it's really not, right? It's a bunch of random stuff you lived through. And so if you connect these events in your book, these scenes in your book, if you can connect them in your reader's mind, you have created plot. Now, you do this in a different way in memoir than you do in fiction. In fiction, the events themselves tend to be connected, right? So if you're what's a movie you already told me a little bit of the plot of the Santa Claus movie you saw recently, or something you've worked on. So do you have an example? What have you been working on lately? Or if you do want to talk about it?
Well, sure.
I
I
turned
just,
the
yeah,
tape. Yeah.
sure. I just wrapped up a very long stint on working on this animated fantasy comedy.
Okay.
And so the pitch is that it's the Wizard of Oz in reverse, where a young witch from a magical land ends up stranded without her powers in New Jersey.
I love it. Okay. So give me an early scene in the movie. What
Okay, well,
happens? How does
so
it
if
start?
so, talking about structure, so Act One is all takes
Uh-huh.
place in this magical land, and we learn about the world
Okay,
that it
but
is.
I want to go back a little bit because
Sure.
you're talking what I call global structure. Global structure
Okay.
is big picture structure.
Sure.
I'm talking about how you get from one scene to the next, and that's also structure. And that at least for memoir writers is where the problem lies. So do you
Hmm.
remember the first scene? What happens in the first scene?
Well, after all of this rewriting, the first scene is
Yeah.
establishing the antagonist.
Okay, so what happens though? What are the first scenes? How does a I'm making this hard on you. Okay,
Well,
let's
it's different because it's weird to describe it rather than letting somebody read it. And the first scene is
I
that I mean the very first scene is this like taking like an overhead view of this world where all these magical creatures are, and then the next scene we meet this rabbit who's the mentor figure, and
okay.
he's dealing with a scrawny nerd who is trying to cheat his way into becoming a wizard.
Okay, good. And then what's the next thing? What so Cheetah's way into becoming a wizard. What's the next thing that happens? So the rabbit
Is the
is the
teacher.
scrawny nerd.
No. The rabbit
Okay,
is the teacher, and
the rabbit is the teacher.
there's a scrawny nerd human.
Oh, okay.
And
Sorry.
that's okay. I know it's when you're dealing with it's an animated thing, so
Well, and
you got to
I
take all
turned
these.
it on you too. See, I didn't prepare you and tell you I'd be interviewing
Oh,
you.
that's okay.
Okay.
I love talking about my stuff. So there.
You do?
Um,
Okay, I love it.
yeah. So the teacher finds out that the nerd is trying to cheat his way into passing his test to become a wizard.
Perfect. Okay. So that is going to play itself out. So the teacher figures out the nerd is trying to cheat,
Right.
and then what's going to happen related to that? So does the
What's
nerd
what
get
the
caught?
so the teacher takes the magical thingamabob that the nerd was
Uh-huh.
using to cheat and puts it back in a
Uh-huh.
very secure location.
Perfect. Okay, so that's plenty. That's all I
Okay.
wanted to get to. So, um, teacher learns that the nerd was cheating, discovers what the nerd, sorry to call it
Yeah,
a
that's
nerd, does
okay.
your
What the
the
nerd was using.
what the nerd was using. So we have causality here. That's how
Okay.
plot is created in fiction. One event brings about the next, right? And
Hmm.
so the teacher wouldn't be looking for this device that the nerd had used to cheat had the teacher not caught the nerd cheating in the first place. Does that make sense?
Correct. That's exactly
So
right.
causality. What happens in memoir writing is that the teacher catches the nerd cheating And the next scene is the nerd going home to decide to learn how to play basketball. No relationship whatsoever.
Got it.
Why is that the case? Because someone has memories of their life, memories of what they lived through, right? And so that's so maybe a week, maybe I don't know, 7 scenes later, we come back to the teacher discovering this device. But your memory of events has all of these things that happened before, in between that. And that is the huge problem that a memoir writer faces. How do I connect? Let's say it's from the nerd's point of view, because it's memoir, it's first
Hmm.
person. The teacher caught me cheating. Then I go home and I turn on the TV and I decide, you know what? I think I'm going to become an NBA player. I don't know what, right? Because that's the way our lives happen. Well, how do you do that? And that's what I see all the time in memoirs that haven't yet been published, in
Hmm.
drafts, and they don't make sense to a reader. They drive a reader crazy. And the reader has the sensation, why is the author telling me this?
Hmm.
Right? There's no sense to it. And that is the problem that I set out to solve. Right. And it's different in memoir writing than it is in fiction. In fiction, you don't have the problem of the nerd deciding that he's going to become an NBA player, because you didn't have that problem, right? But in
Right.
real life, let's say that happened. So that is the problem I set out to solve. That is what I'm talking about when I talk about structure. There is 3 act structure, but I call that global structure. That's big
Hmm.
picture structure. For a memoir, for structure really is, how do you connect your events? How do you connect your scenes? So,
Okay. Yeah, that is one of the things I noticed in some of the examples that you have in the book, which again, the memoir engineering system, is that you have, I guess some of them are made up samples, but also some samples from previous students that you have, I guess, some
yeah.
series of events that are sort of connected, but if you put them all together in one paragraph and read it, it would just be like, I don't understand what is the point of this? Where's the writer trying to take me? But you also had, I think you call it, was it transition? That
Yes.
you were trying to establish connections between these events to make it a little more understandable, a little more easy to follow. And I just wonder if that really comes into play for a lot of writers to eventually get the hang of.
Um, it's not to make it easier, it's actually to create a story. So
Mm,
what your transitions are doing, it's not this simple. It is a Transitions are doing a ton of heavy lifting in memoir writing. You don't need them in screenplays. In theory, you do have them. If you the equivalent in screenplay writing to what transitions are doing for memoir writing would be voiceover narration.
mm,
Is if you So your transitions are basically the narrator of your story. And that's been around for really for millennia in literature,
hmm.
that there's the narrator of the story. So this is the evolution of literature. That's what one thing that I discovered. It happens in novels as well as memoirs. We have the transition, which is basically the narrator. So if the equivalent in a screenplay would be, if you have this voiceover narration, you have this narrator telling the story, that would be your transition writing. And it changes the tone of a screenplay when you do have that voiceover narration, right? Have you
Right.
done voiceover narration? Have you played with it?
Um, I've used it. I've used it very sporadically
Yeah, a
in
lot
my
of
work
screen.
because I want to get I want really this point really hit home for me in the book is that you talk about for screenwriting it's all about show don't tell, and you're like, I hate that phrase because especially when it comes to memoir writing, because
Yes,
it's
yes,
tell don't show, because it is an entirely
yeah,
different animal. So I was really hoping that you could like touch on that, but
yeah,
we can go
yeah.
back to what you were talking
Let's
about
talk
before.
about, because we're kind of there anyway.
Okay.
Absolutely. So, I love the comparison because I have done screenwriting as well.
Sure,
It
sure.
is a very different beast. The end result is very different, right? When you're writing a screenplay, it's a floor plan, right? It's a map what you're writing. So it's not
Hmm.
the final product. You have to describe visually. There's nothing worse in a screenplay than, the character thoughtfully ponders his childhood relationship with his mother. I mean, it would make no sense.
Right.
You couldn't.
Because
It makes
you can't see what somebody's thinking about on screen.
That would be a terrible screenplay. But we're right. You probably read a couple of those. But with memoir writing, the final product really is words. We don't have that visual. And so it is a different medium. We're both writers. You and I are both writers, but the medium is very different. And so telling me what a character is thinking is actually the way to affect your reader emotionally when your final medium consists of words on the page. Very different. So yeah, so tell, don't show really applies. Show, don't tell absolutely in screenwriting, but I don't think it's very good advice when it comes to novels, when it comes to memoir.
Sure, because I was thinking that with a memoir that it's all internal because you're talking about, it's almost like we're getting to see/read the writer's thoughts and how this affects them. And that's
Yeah.
really what it comes down to for memoir writing. Whereas screenplay, it's all visual, that you have to have someone maybe explain it, which not the best way to
Yeah.
do it, but you have to present that information in a visual way. Whereas, as you were saying, it's all words in a memoir that the writer has to tell us, what it is they're thinking and how this makes them feel.
And you can, to a certain extent, give the reader a visual experience to a certain extent.
Mm.
But do you really care that much? Like, do I really, if I were to describe Paul on the page, do I need to, and a lot of beginning writers make this mistake. They describe someone from top to bottom, color of the shirt, the
Hmm.
stitching on, and it takes up so much space. And it actually becomes too much for a reader to endure because you have to concentrate so hard to visualize. The experience of reading a book is just different than the experience of watching a movie. They should both affect you emotionally, but you do that with words when it comes to novels and memoirs.
Yeah. So I mean, this a lot of the things you're talking about. These are things that I was thinking about while I was reading the book. That you talk. I mean, and also with the screenplay and with a memoir, that you have a lot of scenes, as you describe in the book. That how do you classify what goes into a scene for a memoir? Is it the things that are relevant to the story that the
Yeah.
writer's trying to tell? And as I said, you don't want to ramble. You don't want to kind of just like, I think one of the examples is like, her dad walked in and he had his usually wavy hair was just like just clumped down off on his shoulders, and he had his usual whiskey with three ice cubes. And it's like all this detail. It's just slowing things down. It's just kind of like I don't need to know, like, and how many like pinpoints are in the tile on the side of the wall type of thing.
Well, this is again what makes memoir writing difficult is that we have this memory of events, right? And so it's like, take me back to that day in your childhood when you were 8 years old. And your memory is kind of random and splotchy. And that's why people start describing their father's tie and maybe
Hmm.
what the tile looks like because they don't really know what to put there. And that is a huge problem. This is the writing from memory problem, as I've labeled it. And so it's really important to understand why your scene exists, just like in a screenplay. I think it's easier intuitively in a screenplay to go, well, of course, it has to advance the story. Something has to happen. The nerd has to cheat on the test and get caught. Something happened. Whereas for a memoir writer, prior to that, they're like, they have this conversation about the nerd talking to a classmate, and then the bell rings, and then the nerd maybe stubs his toe, and all of, and they, but completely random. The nerd is hungry, decides to get a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, then sees a dog walking by outside. I mean, that would be the memoir writing equivalent of a scene that you described. And it makes sense because you're remembering all of these things happening. So what I try and do is get people, it's a challenge to
Hmm.
take the memories of what happened and turn them into plot. And one of the most important ways of doing that is to understand why their scene exists in their book. Same way you would with a
Sure.
screenplay, you know what you're writing toward. And so now that becomes your process of elimination, and you don't have all of these random things that you're rambling on about.
Okay, that raises a great point. Is that what if one of your students presents a chapter to you and it goes into so much excruciating detail about things that are not important to the story? I mean, that's what it is for screenwriting. That you, I see a lot of scripts from newer writers that they overwrite, that they put way too much information into a scene that yeah, that I have to ask him, what's the point of the scene? He said, oh, well, he has to find out that, she's dating this other guy. I said, well, why do you have this thing about them going on a picnic, like, back when they lived in Omaha? He said, oh, well, that's just part of the backstory. I said, yeah, but you're taking away from the
Uh-huh.
focus of the scene that you're supposed to engage us and tell us this story and keep us interested, but by throwing these things in that you think are relevant, you're actually, shooting yourself in the foot. Now, does this happen a lot with people, with your students who write memoirs? Do they put too much information because they think it's necessary?
Yes, and it's even worse. I mean, because well, I don't even know if they have. So at least with fiction, at least with a screenplay writer, they think it's necessary. With a memoir writer, they're attached to it
Hmm.
emotionally. And come in big bad Wendy and rip apart their memories, right? And that is a cruel thing to do sometimes to people. And it's really hard because taking them from the place of I'm writing down the story of my life on the page and teaching them that really you're not. You're creating art out of what you lived through. So that is a different way to look at memoir. No one really cares about all these little things you lived through.
Okay, so I actually did want to ask, kind of like continuing on that dual path of screenwriting and memoir writing, that you emphasize this is finding the theme of your memoir. So, I mean, does it do writers put their memoirs together with a theme beforehand, or do they write it out and think, okay, I don't really know what the theme is? And sometimes, like, what if they can't decide what it's supposed to be?
Here, I love this question because I think this is the one place that memoir writers get a break. I think here's the one place that I think it's harder for a screenwriter and it's easier for a memoirist. Here is the thing. I tell people that theme will not get you to plot, but plot will get you to theme. It
Hmm.
is very hard to, it's easier when you are creating fiction and you have this theme and you can create a fictional plot around it because the possibilities are infinite. You're making stuff up. Now, when it's the story of your life, that becomes really difficult to start with the theme and figure. It's already so difficult to come up with plot when you're dealing with so many memories from your life. So I tell people, I'm here to help you do plot. I'm here to help you do the hard stuff. It's hard to come up with plot from real life memories. Theme is actually for a memoirist really easy. It is impossible to get away from the theme of your life. So I tell them, do plot. Let's logically come up with the plot for your book. Let's go through this process. As you write, it is impossible to get away from the theme of your life. So if the theme of your life is I always felt like an outcast,
Hmm.
can you get away? I mean, so we'll come up with the plot, and the plot might be, let's say, I got married 3 times, my 3 different marriages, right? That might be your in the writing itself, it's going to come out. It's impossible to get away from it. So that's one thing I love about theme and memoir. It really is probably the only thing that actually is intuitive about memoir. It just comes out. It's impossible to get away from the theme of your life.
Okay, that's really interesting because when I'm developing a new story, I usually try to figure out I have an idea of what the story's about. I don't know all the details, but I have an idea that this is the kind of story I want to tell, and that usually influences what the theme is going to be. And once I can land on the theme, that will have a ripple effect on the rest of the
Yep.
story because with screenwriting, every scene has to advance the plot, the character,
Yep.
and the theme. Because I mean,
Hmm.
not to go off on too much of a sidetrack here, but like one of my absolute favorite, films and scripts is Back to the Future. And so
Uh-huh.
in early on, where they have that, here's a statement, a theme, like page 3, page 5, it's where Marty tells the guy, he says, well, no McFly in the history of Hill Valley has ever amounted to anything. And then Marty says, well, history is going to change. And if you watch the movie, especially when he goes back to 1955, every scene Marty does something that changes history. It may not be a big thing, but it influences the outcome of that scene. So things are different for every scene. And if you haven't seen it in a while, just go back and watch it, and you'll see all of
Yeah.
this in play. It's part of the reason why it's such a brilliant script.
Interesting. Okay, now I have to go back and watch it with that in mind. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's been quite a while, but yeah,
sure.
of course I've seen Back to the Future. Absolutely. I love it.
Okay. So I also wanted to ask, this really. this I want fascinating to hear what you have to say about this is like outlining a memoir. Now, how does that work? Because I mean, I know how to outline a screenplay. I know how to, the plot
Yeah.
points and how to tie them all together. But how would you outline a memoir? Do you have an idea of what the story is going to be, and you have to maybe like, okay, these are the I don't know, the memories I want to include. These are kind of the pivotal moments of that particular time of my life. I mean, what do you advise your students on how to outline what they're going to work on?
So without spending 40 minutes on this answer, so I'm going to give you the condensed version.
Sure.
Uh, a memoir's biggest challenge really is creating a story on a chapter by chapter basis, right? So there's global structure, we have the climax of your book, the resolution, yeah,
Hmm.
all of that. But that as a memoirist is actually not that hard to come up with because you have so much information. So it's not hard to find those aspects, those plot points in your book. What is really a challenge again is all these memories, sifting through the memories, landing on what's going to stay in your book, and those are your memories, and actually taking those memories and turning them into a story. Is that okay? So that is a memoir's biggest challenge. So let me talk about the hardest part,
Hmm.
the hardest thing I do with people, and it really is kind of what I just said. It's coming up. So we do it chapter by chapter. Well, actually, first of all, you have a story. You understand the global search, so you know what your movie's about. You know what your book's about. Um, and then we talk on a chapter by chapter basis how to create a story in every chapter. I said earlier on that plot is basically connected events. Plot is basically connected scenes. So we figure out the scenes that someone will have in a chapter, and then we look at all of those scenes. And so again, the sifting through process. It's not making up scenes. It's coming up, maybe 50 scenes and sifting through them and saying, okay, these are my six best moments. These are my six best events. Looking at those and then figuring out how to connect them to tell a story. So scenes are where you live through events in a book, you transport your reader, and then we use transitions. We have this narrator who is telling how these are related, not literally saying, "Hey, reader, this is how it's related," but telling the story, right? The transitions tell the story. And I think my headphones just died. I'm going to switch audio devices here.
Okay.
Let's see. Got a backup. I think they
That
just died. Okay.
that's perfectly
Talk to
fine.
me. Let me see
Okay.
if I can hear you.
Okay, so we are talking to Wendy Dale, and again, her book is The Memoir Engineering System. Make your first draft your final draft. Now, just I got to say, we've really only touched the tip of the iceberg for a lot of the things that Wendy covers in this book. If you are interested in working on your own memoirs, and there's checklists and there's assignments, and it's just a great package to work on that if you want to engage in this kind of thing. So, Wendy, I think the big question is that so if someone is interested and they get the book, what if they want to get in touch with you to find out more? I mean, is there a Wendy Dale website or are you on social media?
The easiest way to find me is to go to freememoirclass.com, and that will actually link you directly to my memoir writing website. So which has a long, it's geniusmemoirwriting.com, but just go to freememoirclass.com and that'll automatically link you back to my site.
Okay, and what if
So
somebody just wants to check out the book? Is it on Amazon or do they get it through the website? Is that the easier way to do it?
Amazon's probably the easiest. Google the memoir engineering system, it'll pop up.
Okay, that sounds great. And are you on any of the social media platforms? I mean, you'd mentioned YouTube a little earlier.
The place where I have most content is I have a YouTube channel with lots of tips, information on memoir writing topics.
Okay, any of the others? Twitter, Blue Sky,
Uh,
all that
on
fun stuff.
YouTube. If you go to YouTube and you look for Google Wendy Dale YouTube, I'll probably pop up. It's
Okay,
my
Wendy.
company is Memoir Writing for Geniuses. I think that's how I appear on YouTube, but kind of a lot to type in. Just do Wendy
Okay.
Dale YouTube and you'll find me.
Okay, that is fantastic. So again, our guest has been Wendy Dale and her book, The Memoir Engineering System. Make your first draft, your final draft. Wendy, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for being here today.
It's been my pleasure, Paul. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad. And again, her website is freememoirclass.com. And if you go to YouTube, just put in Wendy Dale and probably memoir too, and that'll probably just take you right to it. All right, Wendy, thanks so much for being here. Viewers and listeners, if you enjoyed today's show, please hit like and feel free to leave a comment and subscribe. My social media, you can check out my screenwriting blog at maximumz.blog. Still on Twitter for the time being. I have no idea if I'm going to stick around or not. That is at maximum_Z. The show has its own Twitter account at podcast CWL. The show is also at podcast CWL on Blue Sky. And for Blue Sky and Instagram, I am at Pez Screenwriting, P-E-Z. So those are my initials. If you want to get more books to your library, you can check out my Go Ahead and Ask books. Those are on Amazon. Those are the ones about screenwriting and pie, two wonderful things. Like I said, that's Wendy. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, go write something.